Only if there's still questions. I think Jill's probably handling it well enough.
Do you feel this is a victory for you?
No, I've already expressed my views on that point. A victory is when my client is free.
Does it make it easier now?
Hi, Worm. I need to talk to you. So one thing, it has to be orderly. It's happening here. Is Jill done? Is Jill done?
Yeah, she's finished.
She's done. Well, I'll go with my...
What's it done in front? Down in front. Down in front.
Hold on. Relax.
Leslie, yes. After the outcome of the Eric Menendez trial, she said this was no victory. Jill Lansing just said she didn't think this is a victory. Any change in your opinion?
Well, perhaps Jill and I just have different standards.
so.
That's all. Perhaps I'm greedier than she is, you know, for a real win.
You can take this.
Laurel, I can't hear you. Well, the question's a little weird to me. You mean, how many jurors accepted the truth? A large number of jurors accepted the truth.
I was surprised.
We had a very, very different experience. They, as I think you will hear over the next few weeks, the majority of our jury was pro-defense. That includes the body of them and the alternates. And those jurors' position was that there were jurors who got seated with biases in place and never paid attention to the evidence. No, I just think Lyle's jury as a group were more open-minded going in than certain members of Eric's jury. And therefore there was give and take, there was exchange, there was evaluation of the evidence. That didn't really happen, as far as I understand it, on Eric's jury. And Eric's jury broke not entirely on gender lines, but all 5 first-degree votes were men.
What can you tell us about the possibility of a plea bargain ahead of...
I can't tell you anything. You have to ask Mr. Garcetti, because that's within the power of the prosecution. The defense can't demand such things.
Will you represent him again?
I will represent Eric again if I can possibly afford to do so. And I just wanted to indicate we have started a defense fund, and people are sending in money as best they can. And they should send it to the Eric Menendez Legal Defense Fund at my office. And if we raise a sufficient amount of money, then I can say with greater confidence than I can say it today that yes, I will be representing him. 4929 Wilshire Boulevard, Suite 940, Los Angeles 90010.
How much do you have so far?
I don't know. I haven't counted. Not much.
What you know now,
Just a second. Listen to Linda.
knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently in the trial?
Well, if the answer to that was yes, your next question would be what, and I've got to save that for the next trial. You can always do things somewhat differently. We made hundreds upon hundreds of strategic and tactical and judgment calls throughout the trial. And we the jurors that I've talked to from my panel, and I've spent a great deal of time talking to them by now, have certain suggestions, and some of them are very, very wise, and I may follow those suggestions. And some members of Lyle's jury had some suggestions as well that we will seriously consider. But by and large, when a jury reaches a verdict, it's because there's a certain mix of individuals that can work together. And the biggest problem with Eric's jury is that there was a mix of individuals that could not work together. Lyle's jury was more harmonious than that.
The vote of the jury was 3 votes for first degree, 3 votes for second degree, and 6 votes for voluntary manslaughter for Jose Menendez. And 1 second, I'll tell you what it was for 1, which is 3 first, 3 second, 5 voluntary, and 1 involuntary for Mary Louise Menendez. The charges here were first-degree murder with special circumstances. The jury has indicated that at one point the vote was split 9 for voluntary manslaughter and 3 for second-degree murder. So I do consider it a victory.
What changed their minds, did they say?
They didn't say. We haven't had an opportunity to talk to them at any length at this point.
No matter what, do you think that's fair?
Can I do one at a time? I do not know if I will represent them at the next trial. The court will appoint lawyers for them.
You think the abuse argument was important in the defense?
I think the abuse argument was important. It was our position that the way they acted was because of fear. And the fear was obviously a result of years of abuse. The court is going to appoint. I obviously, if the court will appoint me, will be available to represent Lyle again. Do I want to do this work again? No.
What's the case again?
They have not indicated yet whether there will be a capital murder case again.
What's Lyle's reaction to the abuse trial?
I'm not going to speak for Lyle at this point in time.
Do you feel that given, okay, if there is another trial, that the defense is at a disadvantage because it's already been played out once?
Whenever there's a second trial, everybody's at certain advantages and disadvantages. I think they balance out between the prosecution and the defense.
Is there any more insight into what swayed the jury at all? I know you both had brief discussions, but
We've talked to them very briefly, and I think that their responses are all the predictable ones. Obviously, different jurors saw it differently. Those who were receptive to the abuse defense were more sympathetic.
and did it pretty much stick from the beginning, or was there, I mean, you said there one point was a 9-3 cut was changed.
That's correct.
Did you get any insight into how that developed?
No, we didn't. We didn't have a chance to talk to the jurors at any length at all. They merely told us that at one point it was 9 for voluntary manslaughter and 3 for second-degree murder, and it switched and ended up as it did. Well, he wasn't convicted of murder.
Or any gender breakdown?
No, not on our jury at all.
Do you think it's possible this case was so long, so complicated, and gave jurors so many options that no 12 persons could have decided this?
I think that the complexity of this case and the fact that it draws on individual life experiences makes this a case which will probably never result in a unanimous verdict.
In light of the fact that many people, say 2 years ago, thought that this would be a slam dunk case for the prosecution, this came up, the question came to Lansing before too, I think. Do you feel some sense of victory though at this point? Have you at least reached enough people that have a hung jury?
I think we have a result which no one would have ever predicted at the beginning of the trial.
Could you expound on that?
I don't think that anybody at the beginning of the trial believed the possibility that these 2 young men were abused or that they could have been motivated by fear. Obviously, a great number of people now understand that that was the situation.
How did you lose the case? Why do you think?
Don't talk about losing. We did not lose the case. This is not winning or losing. It's not a game of basketball or baseball or football. This is justice. We are going to be trying the case a second time. Some cases take more than one opportunity, and I am pleased that at least we have that second opportunity. Had they come back with voluntary manslaughter, you would have seen an entirely different reaction from me because I would have been utterly disappointed.
Are you going to pursue the death penalty again?
I have every intention of going forward with the death penalty, yes.
What are you going to do differently next time?
Give us a little opportunity to reflect a bit. I mean, the jury has now just come back. We've had an opportunity to talk to them just a little bit. As you see, Lester Kuriyama's not even here. We are all going to talk about this case. There will probably be further discussions with the jurors, and there will be a period of reflection before we go forward with the case.
Mr. Garcetti, does this then slam the door on any plea bargaining that the defense might have in mind?
There will be no plea bargaining in this case.
Any instant speculation then on why it ended up in a mistrial and why this case ended up in a mistrial?
I'm going to let Pam perhaps address that question because I've not had the opportunity to talk to the jurors myself. I think I know some of the reasons, but perhaps Pam might address it more directly.
Well, I think it was the emotional pull of the defense that was basically the cause of the mistrial, that jurors were swayed by their emotions and were persuaded by the defense. And there were other jurors who were adamant that this was a murder, and they could not reach a meeting of the minds.
On your jury, there were only 3 members who voted for first-degree murder. Did that disappoint you?
No, because I don't think that was a constant. In other words, there were switches back and forth. So.
But didn't you anticipate the defense and the direction they would be taking, the fact that they would try to turn the defendants into the victims?
Oh, certainly. I mean, of course we did, but we did prove our case, and many people do feel that this is a murder case and that we proved our case. And so I think, though, that the emotional pull of the defense is kind of similar to a situation where you have the pro-life and the pro-choice people, and you put them in a room together and ask them to make a decision. I think that's kind of what happened here.
Let me interject there, too. What you have is a situation where the people that were on trial, unfortunately, were Kitty and Jose Menendez. and you heard these god-awful stories about them, and we really didn't have the ability to have them come say, hey, wait a minute, you know, unless we were really leading a different life than we ourselves know, then, you know, this really isn't fair, is it? But don't forget, that is the role of the defense, to do everything possible for their client. And they did it.
Mr. Garcetti, on that note, how does your office, when you get a case like this, where it's a murder case and the defense is claiming that they were abused and it's self-defense, how does your office decide when to believe a particular story and maybe go with a plea bargain?
You look at the evidence. My goodness, you know, I've been in the district attorney's office for 25 years, my entire professional career. I have reviewed literally thousands of cases. I've tried many, many cases myself. You look at each case independently. There may be some cases where you would say, no, this is not murder in the first degree. Maybe this is not even a crime. In this case, this is murder in the first degree based on the facts that we know exist.
Are you convinced Lyle and Eric were lying?
I'm convinced that the jury perhaps believed at least some extent of what they testified to, but I am confident that a second time around we are going to be able to convince the jury that our view of the evidence is the logical and, in fact, the accurate view of the evidence, not what the defendants tried to portray.
Why? How do you think it'll be different? Why do you think that you don't think the emotional pull will still be there?
No, I do not believe the emotional pull will be there. They're better actors than even I thought they were, if they're able to pull it off a second time. They had, as Pam said, the emotional draw to the jury the first time. We now know what their entire defense is. We did not know that before. That makes us, I think, perhaps in a better position than before we started this case.
Therefore, Mr. Garcetti, do you believe this was a fabricated defense?
I won't come right out and say yes to your question, but there's certainly, it boggles my imagination in terms of believing what the defense put forward. I cannot accept it.
Will Pam and Lester be trying a second case?
I have indicated I'm very proud of the effort that they made. I am very proud, but give us a little time to reflect. I mean, Lester literally has been sick almost during this whole trial. I want to talk to them. I want to get their input as to, you know, what they think about the case. Do they want to go forward with the case? As of today, they are the ones assigned to the case.
Many people have suggested that perhaps it was a disservice to the taxpayers to spend another $1 million to prosecute these particular defendants. What do you say to that?
Those are probably the same individuals who would prefer that we not try any cases. This is not a robbery case. This is not a burglary case. This is not a possession of cocaine case. You're talking about two homicides, two murders, two first-degree murders of a mother and father committed by their children. What is the message that we are trying to send as a society to everyone in this country? We have an ethical, a professional, and moral responsibility to go forward with this case as a first-degree murder case. Sometimes justice and costs conflict, perhaps. This may cost $1 million. We may spend more money on the prosecution than the defense said, and that would be a new one. But if we do, it's because we're seeking justice, and that's what we're going to do, and be damned with how much money it's going to cost. We're going to seek justice in this case.
Some criminal defense attorneys, Gill, over the months have said that a lot of the evidence presented by the defense is evidence you would normally only be allowed in a penalty phase of a murder trial. I mean, do you feel that the judge, and I know it's always hard to take on a judge, but do you feel that the judge didn't let too much in? Did he give them too much leeway?
Take a deep breath before. Probably in any trial, you will have prosecutors and defense lawyers who can always complain a bit about the judge. Certainly we're in no different position. Yes, we were disappointed with some of the rulings. against us, perhaps in favor of the defense, but the defense can probably say the same thing. We now hope, based upon all the evidence that's been presented, that we will be in a better position to perhaps to narrow down this case. Let's get it to the heart of the issues that a jury should in fact consider, and hopefully we will have a court that will agree to narrow down the scope of the evidence.
Does that indicate that you think you may get a new judge?
Oh, I don't know. You know, we can make some changes. You're not going to get a new prosecution. It's still going to be the LADA's office, but you're going to have a judge who may make some perhaps changes in his rulings.
Do you anticipate any change in the jury setup?
Don't know. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Whether we have one jury hear both cases or not, that's something that we want to talk about.
Because if you don't believe the defense story altogether, what do you think was the motive for these first-degree murders?
We've talked about it. You have two young men who were living a, quote, Beverly Hills style life. They knew that they were about to be disowned. They were going to be disinherited. They decided they were going to do something about it to protect perhaps their own lifestyle and their future lifestyle.
Do you feel that the juries in this case were adequately insulated from the extensive media coverage that the case has been given?
Well, you raise a much larger issue just in terms of juries, period. Anytime you have high-profile cases, it frankly is the most troubling issue of this case, the Denny case, and perhaps any other high-profile case that this or any other prosecutorial agency is going to handle now. I think for the first time that you have jurors, some jurors, certainly I don't mean to paint a broad paint swath of all of the jurors, who now think, wait a minute, I'm going to have my day in the sun here. I am going to perhaps be not confronted, but have the opportunity to be on television, radio, newspaper. You may have some jurors, and it just might be a minority of jurors, and I think it is a minority of jurors, who may think, say, wait a minute, you know, okay, I've got a personal agenda here, or I have a social or political agenda, now I can do something about it. To be critical of this jury, because I've not talked to the jury.
Question for Pam. You had talked about there had been switches going on with the jury. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Well, it's my understanding that they were not. Oh, sorry. I got the impression from speaking to them, and we spoke to them only very briefly, that that people were switching between voluntary and murder, and that they were switching between the degrees as well.
Like one person going all the way from...
Well, I don't know the extent of it.
There were 9 originally for manslaughter, and then it went to 6. Do you know how? Do you have any idea what those? How
No.
People changed their mind?
No, because the jurors agreed that they would not discuss each other's deliberations, so obviously someone violated that and spoke to the defense. But in terms of speaking to us, they said they wouldn't reveal how other jurors had voted, only how they had voted. But I got that impression that there was switching as recently as today, I think. But I wasn't in the jury room. But
Pam, in a second trial, would Dr. O'Seal still be a star witness?
a star witness? That's your term. I can't tell you who the witnesses will be in the second trial. There's just no way of knowing.
Do you call experts in the second trial?
Again, I don't know who the witnesses will be in the second trial.
You're right in my shot. You're going to have to go down.
Mr. Gessler, would you please like
In front of the mic, please. Front.
My reaction right now is... we happy? My reaction is one of tremendous relief. It's hard to know if the relief makes up for the tremendous strain of waiting for the verdict to come in, but I'm very relieved that it was a life verdict. I think that is the proper verdict given the findings that they made at the guilt phase, that this should not have been a death case, and I'm very relieved that it came out to be the proper verdict of life without parole.
How did your client feel?
With the jurors, and what did they say to you?
We had a chance to talk to the jurors. I talked to them as people, not about the case, and I'm not going to tell you what they said. That was just people to people.
And
I
your
want to chance to
client-
make people instead of attorneys and jurors again to each other.
Mr. Gessler, can you tell us?
Lyle is relieved because he wants to live. life without parole is not something to be looking forward to. So you can't say that he's happy, but certainly he's relieved that it's life and not death.
What made the difference, sir?
I think a lot of the difference was the difference in the way the defense was allowed to be presented this time from the way it was the first time. No one can ever say what makes a difference sometimes between one case and another. Individual jurors see things differently. The evidence is presented differently. It's viewed differently. And results sometimes are different.
Can you hear Leslie Abramson, please, about Eric? Leslie? Leslie, can we hear from you, please?
Identify yourself on tape.
Yeah, I'm Charlie Gessler from the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office.
Leslie, you're live on Channel 4. Can you please explain?
I'm so excited.
Can you please explain your reaction?
Well, it's tremendous.
Someone load those mics. Someone load those mics.
I'm short.
Got to. Someone up there lower the mics.
Lower the stand.
Lower the stand. I'm not touching that. It's not fair for my own former cameraman to ask me to look that way.
Leslie, would you call this a win?
Oh man, what's a win? You know, that they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison. On the good side, I will say that they're both such considerable human beings that they will find a way to be productive. And in fact, some of the jurors were saying that too. It was their expectation that they would both find a way to contribute to society even if they're in prison for the rest of their lives. And I truly believe that's true of them, where I could not say that that's true for most people in their situation.
Did the jurors indicate there was any one most persuasive element that caused the verdict?
Now let me just say that we have not debriefed this jury at all, that we were just sharing with them how difficult this case was for them as well as for us, how emotional, how torn they felt. They are very, very nice, decent people, all of them.
Leslie, do you think Judge Weisberg crippled your case by not allowing...
Wait, I'm trying to do one at a time. You already got one. Now, Warren gets one, then you get another one. Yes, Warren. And then Tony, even though she hasn't been that good to me this time around. But go ahead, Warren.
What was it like waiting, not knowing what that verdict was going to be for the last 3 or 4 days?
Well, I was asking people if there was some other way to spell hell besides H-E-L-L, because you just live in absolute hell. When any verdict comes in and you're waiting for a verdict, you can't do anything else but focus on that. And the worst time of all is after you know there is one, and you know that prayer no longer can help you because someone has signed that verdict form. So it's terrible.
How do you refer to them as considerable human beings, given the fact of what they were?
Oh, please. I mean, anybody asked that question does not understand that people are not just what they do, they are what they are. Tony, did you have a question?
Given the gag order, we haven't heard your reaction to the verdict itself, and frustration and anger.
No, my reaction to the original verdict can only be described as despair. There was no anger. I can't be angry with a jury that follows the instructions that they're given and analyzes the evidence the way they see it. I mean, I'm not an objective observer of facts. They are. It was just merely what the reality of what it meant was that never, ever would either of them ever have a life. And since they never had one, it doesn't seem fair in a kind of moral sense, but I can't say it's unfair in a legal sense. I could, but I'm not going to. Wait a minute, Mary Jane.
Leslie, I hate to ask you this, but could you please explain to us what happened with Dr. Vickery?
I'm glad you hate to ask that, because I'm not going to answer it just now.
Well, you said
let me just say that I want to be able to assess what this record looks like. I mean, one of the things that has been very, very depressing to me ever since this whole disaster struck was how quick people are to judge you guilty when all you've done is try to assert your right to not have to answer a question that day in that forum. Because as most of you know, the next day we were in court, I withdrew the assertion of the Fifth Amendment. I was advised by a lawyer who's a very good lawyer who had not seen a single piece of paper, a single word in a transcript. He doesn't know what's going on. And unlike some of my clients, I'm a client who takes my lawyer's advice. So I did that, and then I have watched people who claim to be my friends and colleagues accuse me of everything under the sun. I mean, in the press right now, I am tried, convicted, in jail, disbarred, and in permanent disgrace. And that is really hard to take when you're under a gag order, number one, and when, more importantly, your client's rights are far more important than your own reputation or public image. And I absolutely could not say anything on that record openly in front of the district attorney to refute what Dr. Vickery was blurting out obviously because he was caught by surprise when he shouldn't have been.
But can't you refute it now?
I can refute all of it, but I'm not going to take this forum because it's a long, fairly complicated explanation. But I can unequivocally say I did not violate any laws. I did not violate any ethical strictures. I doubt very much that I would ever be disbarred for such a thing. I mean, I can't see it, and I never could.
Leslie, you've never been a person at a loss for words, but how difficult was it to watch Mr. Levin essentially take over after that point?
It was actually a great relief. If you want to know the truth, I have never thought that emotionally I could make a penalty argument on behalf of Eric Menendez. I always felt I'd fall apart because I care a great deal about him. I have been, you know, his first friend for 6 years, and you know, you cannot argue for your best friends. You cannot argue that kind of thing. Can you imagine getting up there and asking someone to spare the life of your child? It's really too hard. So I had always planned to have Barry do it. Barry wanted to do it very badly, and I agreed that he could. So it was actually a relief, and since I thought he did an outstanding job, I wasn't passing him notes like I did during the trial.
Kind of a deep feeling for him. How did you feel in the guilt phase, personally and professionally? How did you take that?
During or at the verdict? Well, I felt horrible. I mean, he doesn't deserve to spend the rest of his life in prison. I thought, you know what I thought about? I thought about every client I had represented for 26 years, every one that I had gotten acquitted, every one who was on the streets of Los Angeles, and Eric Menendez is by far the most deserving and the least dangerous of the entire pack.
How do you feel about Judge Weisberg now and his rulings in this?
He's very smart.
Leslie, but do you blame Judge Weisberg at all? I mean, you kept out your so-called abuse excuse.
I'm not into blame today. I'm into relief today. I disagree with Judge Weisberg's rulings, and appellate courts will now have the case before them, and we'll see if they agree or disagree as well. I'm not into slam the judge today. It's all water under the bridge.
When you say that, Eric, there's one misconception about this case. What would
only one?
If you had to pick one.
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, whatever the first thing, what popped into his mind? That if you do something violent, that means you're a violent person, that you're not a feeling or emotional human being, or that that every murder is cold-blooded. That's all ludicrous. Almost every murder is a crime coming from some form of deep emotion. And situational homicides, family homicides, are always a product of long relationships. So, I mean, it's the nastiness of portraying them as spoiled rich kids that has always been the biggest misconception.
Leslie, whatever kind of parents
you've got too many. But they're good.
What was Eric's first statement to you after the verdict came down today?
He didn't say anything.
Did he?
I said thank God 4 times.
And his reaction?
He just sighed.
I mean Eric, because the verdict.
I wouldn't try to predict God's reaction these days. Are you still there? He didn't have a reaction that I could see.
Leslie, what about Eric?
Linda?
Jurors say that there was a big dispute in the jury room over life or death.
No, and I didn't get the sense that there was at all. I think that what they did say was that it was agony. That the first decision was agony. I didn't get the sense this decision was difficult, but the first one apparently was. I didn't ask. We haven't debriefed them at all. We just got to know them. They're very nice.
Leslie, what will Eric's life
when
be
they
like
feel
now?
like talking to us.
Leslie, is this your last trial? Last
Oh, I
case?
doubt it. You know, there is that thing about paying mortgages and eating and that sort of thing. Yes, Mary Jane?
What is Eric's life going to be like now?
Extremely unpleasant and dangerous.
Can you just describe a little bit?
I don't know. You know, I've never spent a night in prison. I know it's pretty much the way Barry described it. It's a cell the size of a bathroom with a bunk and a toilet and a sink. It's a life, I imagine that he's going to be in some form of protective custody because of the notoriety. So it's going to be lonely and boring and scary.
Will he be with Lyle, do you think?
That's up to the Department of Corrections, and we're going to certainly try to arrange that if they'll allow it. But who knows? You know, they can be very spiteful.
How will they lead productive lives? You mentioned that earlier.
Well, because I really believe that human beings live mostly within themselves, in their heads. And a productive life is one in which you gain wisdom over the years and in which you're able to contribute back. I know that he has a great deal of empathy for children and a great deal of interest in learning. I could see Eric easily becoming, you know, a history researcher, a writer of books. He is always striving. One of the, as I was explaining to one of the jurors, the thing about the way they were raised is, as harsh as one side of it was, it did make them extremely hard-working, self-motivated people. I mean, he did write a book this past year alone in jail, even though he was also worrying about the trial and trying to prepare himself to testify again. So he will never give up trying to be better and know more and learn more.
Can you talk about how this trial has affected you?
I don't know. I haven't read it. I have a feeling it's probably going to need a little help. Because he does have, you know, only a high school education, and as a tennis star in high school, he didn't have to do all that well in academics to be accepted.
After a long career,
What are your hopes for an appeal, and what would be the major issues of it?
Well, our hopes for appeal would be obviously a reversal, and we think the most obvious issue, though we're going to be outlining all of them in a motion for a new trial, the most obvious issue will be the fact that the judge reversed field on us the weekend before final arguments began and refused to instruct on imperfect self-defense. I don't think I ever recovered from that weekend. It was surreal.
I wanted to ask you how this has affected you. You talked about human beings growing within themselves. I mean, how has this case affected you after?
You're asking me that this week? This week when I stand, you know, accused of everything under the sun? It'll take a long time to sort it all out. I always thought, I have thought until recently that if I had to look back over the whole case and point to the one thing that symbolized it, I would point to my son. Because what I learned about how to raise children and how not to raise children from this case, I decided to put into operation by adopting a baby. And that baby has been the greatest joy of my entire life, bar none. I'd give up everything else for him. And so the case always had basically whatever happens to Eric and Lyle, you know, I didn't raise them. I can't undo the past. But what happens to my boy, I have total control over.
Leslie, can I ask this question? However awful Jose's treatment may or may not have been, do they deserve to die?
Oh, nobody deserves to die. Shouldn't we all live forever so we can always improve and be better people? I think so.
Can we have Mr. Levin?
That's the thing about being lead counsel. You can tell
It wasn't?
Right, what am I saying?
In front of people over here.
Obviously, is your reaction how you felt.
Well, I don't know if there's ever true happiness when you're dealing with such a tragedy. This has been a horrible tragedy for the Menendez family, for the Anderson family. I am relieved that both Eric and Lyle didn't get the death penalty. I think that would have been a travesty of justice. I don't think that this was a death penalty case in the first place. But to that extent, I'm relieved. But, you know, do I feel happy? No, I don't feel happy.
Do you think there was any one factor that weighed most heavily in the ultimate decision of the jurors? You argued to them, you saw their reaction, and you talked to them briefly. What do you think was the deciding factor?
It's impossible to say. I have no idea. I mean, you know, the most difficult position that a lawyer could be in arguing in a penalty phase is not knowing what the jury accepted or rejected and coming to their decision of guilt. So it's very difficult to decide what your argument should be. And, you know, I just looked within myself and asked myself what I felt the strongest reasons why Eric should not receive the death penalty, and that's what I did.
After your talks with jurors, were you able to tell at any point that there was a turning point that made them vote the way you wanted them to?
I got the sense, and this is only my sense, that they never seriously considered death.
Why do you say that?
When I looked at them, when I got up to the podium and looked at them in the eye, and I was talking to them, I was feeling very strong, empathetic reactions back. I felt that they were communicating with me and listening to what I had to say. If you were there, I told them I was terrified. I was scared that they wouldn't listen, but I could tell right away that they were listening, they wanted to listen, and I didn't sense it.
Why then would it take 13 hours to come back, 13 plus hours to come back to the verdict if they never...
Give me that first. Give me that. Well, they're a conscientious jury. I'm not saying what they... Strong indication that they were looking to do something other than convicting them the way they did. But then again, most of our defense was gutted. So we were put in a very difficult position in having to argue an acquittal for Mrs. Menendez, and they could have come back with voluntary manslaughter on Mr. Menendez.
Reasons might have been defense sympathizers.
Can you talk to the cameras, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
No, I don't know what they were thinking. We haven't had an opportunity to talk to them yet.
Barry, your final argument. None of you see. Can I say something?
I think so, Warren. You know, I'm normally the kind of death penalty cases I handle don't involve defendants like Eric and Lyle Menendez. It did affect me. I got very close to Eric. I felt very strongly about him living. He became my friend. I liked him a lot. I became emotionally involved, perhaps, in the case as well.
Did they ever talk about? Did they ever talk said anything about their feelings about the death penalty aside from just these defendants?
I'm sorry, Warren. Could you repeat it?
Do you think this jury said anything about the death penalty? Other than they did, I'm talking about outside this particular case.
No, I don't think that this was a referendum on the death penalty. I think that the jurors felt that this was not an appropriate case for the death penalty for these defendants.
Did Lyle or Eric ever talk about remorse to you?
Well, remember, Eric Menendez is my client. Lyle Menendez isn't. I don't talk to Lyle Menendez about those things. But Eric Menendez has always been remorseful, grief-stricken, in tremendous pain whenever talking about these killings. And I've been with him now for a year, and he has never changed in that view.
Barry, in his closing argument, David Conn said that perhaps Maria Menendez wasn't aware of what was going on. You know, she was an old lady. Did you think that was a cheap shot, and was she aware of what was going on?
Of course, Maria Menendez was aware of what was going on, and I mean, I don't know what possessed the prosecutor to even suggest that she didn't know that her son had been killed, that her grandchildren were on trial for murder, and that their lives were at stake, that she desperately wanted them to live. She knew all those things, and I think it was a regretful remark that he made.
What was it like to have to ask for co-counsel to be removed?
I am not commenting on anything that occurred with respect to that.
Very well. What role do you think the families sticking up for the boys have?
Well, I think it's unusual that you have families of the victim supporting the defendants. But then again, I don't think that was essentially the one factor that swayed this particular jury. Well, I think youth, I think the fact that Eric had turned himself in, that he confessed, I think those were important factors as well.
You said this wasn't a death penalty case. Why should it not be a death penalty case?
Well, it shouldn't have been a death penalty case because it was an emotional killing that occurred out of a lifelong history of parental-child relationship. It was not a random act. There was no evidence that Eric or Lyle Menendez had a violent past. This was not a situational type killing. It was not done randomly and where the typical kinds of death penalty cases you see. This is a case where the prosecution sought the death penalty only for political reasons. They took advantage of the media that was against the Menendez brothers, and they hoped that the public would be so swayed and angered by what occurred in the first trial that a jury would come back with a death judgment. But this was not, they didn't even seek death on O.J. Simpson.
Do you think the death penalty is always inappropriate in families?
I don't know. I think every case stands and falls on its facts, but certainly these facts did not justify asking for the death penalty.
What about the growing sociopathy of the boys?
Let me interrupt just 1 minute. I just want to let everybody know that there are 7 jurors who were willing to talk to the press in about 15 minutes in the department and in the courtroom. Just
What
wanted
floor
to
is that,
let you
Julianne?
know. The courtroom.
Oh, the courtroom. Thank you.
What about the growing sociopathy of the boys?
What are you referring to?
Guys?
Well, the one crime, I don't think that had any relationship to this. I mean, Eric wasn't even 18 years old. No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Question number 3 is this. I mean, the jury basically rejected your defense.
supposedly
We didn't get it. Our defense was rejected by the judge.
Okay.
Upstairs. The jury, we believe, reached the correct verdict.
Safe to say several $1 million.
For both of the trials? Well, if you look at it, what has it been? Almost 8 years, 7 years, whatever it's. Yes. During that time, sure it has. By the time you count how much it costs to go to the Supreme Court, things like that, yes.
In excess of $2 million.
Yes.
Will they serve time in the same prison?
Well, I can't answer that. We don't know.
Who makes that decision?
The California Department of Corrections will make that decision.
Will you have any input on
Yeah.
Mr. Garcetti, in retrospect, was it worth it carrying this case the extra step and seeking the death penalty instead of stopping short of that?
Of course. We go through the same process in any case where someone might be eligible for the death penalty. We only seek the death penalty in about 20% of all cases where someone is eligible for the death penalty. We take that decision to be, the most serious decision that we make. But that decision was made and we went forward with it. The fact that the jurors felt that life imprisonment without the possibility of parole is sufficient punishment, that is the role and function of the jury. This jury has been a very careful, deliberative body. You have seen how they have examined the evidence, or seemingly examined the evidence. You're not going to find any disagreement in the prosecution that in any way would slap the jury because they didn't reach a decision to recommend death. They did their job, and they did it appropriately.
The defense argued in closing arguments that you didn't seek the death penalty for O.J. Simpson. Do you think that had any impact on the decision not to return a death verdict?
I can't answer that question. I mean, no one's really talked to the jury. I'm sure David and Carol, they didn't talk about that to them.
Did they give any indication at all of what disagreements there were?
No, as I said, we really didn't get into it in great detail, but I don't think, just based upon the brief time that I had to speak to them, I don't think that they made their decision based upon what the district attorney's office did or did not do in another case. I argued to the jury that in each case what we have to do is the right thing. And if they felt that death is the right decision in this case, then they should make that decision regardless of any of the decisions made by this district attorney's office or any other district attorney's office in any other case.